Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to study together, to learn from one another, and to learn of one another within the context of Torah. We are in Parshat Terumah in the book of Exodus, chapter 25. We will read through the English translation. I'll present to you the focus study of our Torah portion, and then we will open it up for our collaborative conversation about it. If you'd like to unmute at this point, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for this opportunity of sharing wisdom with one another. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu
melech haolam asher kishanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Let me share with you the opening verses of our Torah portion, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. Book of Exodus, chapter 25, verse 1. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moves them. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli and other stones for setting for the ephod and for the breastpiece. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them. Exactly as I show you the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings, so shall you make it." Tony, would you like to read there verse 10?
Thank you, Rabbi. They shall make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with pure gold. Overlay it inside and out, and make upon it a gold molding round about. Cast 4 gold rings for it to be attached to its 4 feet, 2 rings on one of its side walls and 2 on the other. Make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Then insert the poles into the rings on the side walls of the ark for carrying the ark. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark. They shall not be removed from it. And deposit in the ark the tablets of the pact, which I will give you.
Thank you. We're now in chapter 25, verse 17. Anna, would you like to read?
You shall make a cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. Make 2 cherubim of gold, make them of hammered work at the 2 ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub at one end and the other cherub at the other end. One of a piece with the cover you shall make the cherubim at its 2 ends. The cherubim shall have their wings spread out above, shielding the cover with their wings. They shall confront each other, the faces of the cherubim being turned toward the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark after depositing inside the ark the pact that I will give you. There I will meet with you, and I will impart to you from above the cover, from between the 2 cherubim that are on top of the ark of the pact, all that I will command you concerning the Israelite people.
Thank you, Anna. So we're on chapter 25, verse 23. Richard, would you like to read a little bit starting there?
Thank you, Rabbi. I shall. You shall make a table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with pure gold, and make a gold molding around it. Make a rim of a hand's breadth around it, and make a gold molding for its rim around it. Make 4 gold rings for it, and attach the rings to the 4 corners at its 4 legs. The rings shall be next to the rim as holders for poles to carry the table. Make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. By these the table shall be carried. Make its bowls, ladles, jars, and jugs with which to offer libations. Make them of pure gold, and on the table you shall set the bread of display to be before me always.
Thank you. And Marco, would you like to read starting at verse 31?
Thank you. You shall make a lampshade of pure gold. The lampshade shall be made of hammered work, its base and its shaft, its cup, calyxes, excuse me, and petals shall be of one piece. 6 branches shall issue from its side, 3 branches from one side of the lampstand, and 3 branches from the other side of the lampstand. And on one branch, on one branch, wait a minute, I've lost my place. On one branch, there shall be 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyxes and petals. And on the next branch, there shall be 3 cups shaped like the almond blossoms, each with a calyx and petals. So for all 6 branches issuing from the lampshade. And on the lampstand itself, there shall be 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyxes and petals. A calyx of one piece with it under a pair of I keep losing a pair of branches, and one piece with it under the second pair of branches, and a calyx of one piece with it under the last pair of branches. So for all 6 branches issuing from the lampstand, to their calyxes and their sterns shall be one piece with it, the whole of it a single hammered piece of pure gold. Make it 7 lamps. The lamp shall be so mounted as to give the light on its front side, and its tongs and fire pans of pure gold. It shall be made with all these furnishings out of the talent of pure gold. Note well and follow the patterns for them that are being shown you on the mountain.
Thank you, Margaret. And Paul, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 26?
Thank you, Rabbi. You shall make the tabernacle of 10 curtains, twisted linen with turquoise, purple, and scarlet wool. With a woven design of cherubim shall you make them. The length of a single curtain, 28 cubits, and the width, 4 cubits for each curtain, the same measure for all curtains. 5 curtains shall be attached to one another, and 5 curtains attached to one another. You shall make loops of turquoise wool at the edge of the single curtain at the end of one set. And you shall make the same on the edge of the outermost curtain of the second set. 50 loops shall you make on the first curtain, and 50 loops shall you make on the end of the curtain that is on the second set. The loops shall correspond to one another. You shall make 50 hooks of gold, and you shall attach the curtains to one another with the hooks, so that the tabernacle should become one.
Thank you so much, Paul. Let me invite Jay, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 7?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. You shall then make cloths of goat's hair for a tent over the tabernacle. Make the cloths 11 in number. The length of each cloth shall be 30 cubits, and the width of each cloth shall be 4 cubits. The 11 cloths to have the same measurements. Join 5 of the cloths by themselves and the other 6 by themselves, and fold over the 6 cloths at the front of the tent. Make 50 loops on the edge of the outermost cloth of the one set, and 50 loops on the edge of the cloth of the outer set. Make 50 copper clasps and fit the clasps onto the loops, and couple the tent together so that it becomes one whole. As for the overlapping excess of the cloths to the tent, the extra half cloth shall overlap the back of the tabernacle, while the extra cubit at either end of each length of tent cloth shall hang down to the bottom of the 2 sides of the tabernacle and cover it. And make for the tent a covering of tanned ram skins and a covering of dolphin skins above.
Thank you so much. Jay. And Robert, would you like to read starting at verse 15?
Yes, thank you. And thou shalt make the boards for the tabernacle of shittim wood standing up. 10 cubits shall be the length of a board, and 1.5 cubits shall be the breadth of one board. 2 tenons shall there be in one board, set in order one against another. Thus thou shalt make for all the boards of the tabernacle. And thou shalt make the boards for the tabernacle, 20 boards on the south side southward. And thou shalt make 40 sockets of silver under the 20 boards, 2 sockets under one board for his 2 tenons, and 2 sockets under another board for his 2 tenons. And for the second side of the tabernacle on the north side, there shall be 20 boards, and there 40 sockets of silver, 2 sockets under one board, and 2 sockets under another board. And for the sides of the tabernacle westward, thou shalt make 6 boards, and 2 boards shalt thou make of the corners of the tabernacle in the 2 sides. And they shall be coupled together beneath, and they shall be coupled together above the head of it unto one ring. Thus shalt it be for them both. They shall be for the 2 corners. And they shall be 8 boards, and their sockets of silver 16 sockets, 2 sockets under one board, and 2 sockets under another board. And thou shalt make bars of shittim wood, 5 for the boards of the one side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the boards of the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the boards of the side of the tabernacle, for the 2 sides westward. And the middle bar in the midst of the boards shall reach from end to end, and thou shalt overlay the boards with gold, and make their rings of gold for places for the bars, and thou shalt overlay the bars with gold. And thou shalt rear up the tabernacle according to the fashion thereof, which was showed thee in the mount.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Sherry. Would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 31?
Thank you. You shall make a curtain of blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine twisted linden. It shall be a design of cherubim worked into it. Hang it upon 4 posts of acacia wood overlaid with gold and having hooks of gold set in 4 sockets of silver. Hang the curtain under the clasp and carry the ark of the pact there behind the curtain, so that the curtain shall serve you as a partition between the holy and the holy of holies. Place the cover upon the ark of the pact and the holy of holies. Place the table outside the curtain and the lampstand by the south wall of the tabernacle opposite the table, which is to be placed by the north wall.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Joanne. Would you like to read starting at verse 36?
Thank you, Rabbi. You shall make a screen for the entrance of the tent of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and fine twisted linen done in embroidery. Make 5 posts of acacia wood for the screen, and overlay them with gold, their hooks being of gold, and cast for them 5 sockets of copper. You shall make the altar of acacia wood, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. The altar is to be square and 3 cubits high. Make its horns on the 4 corners, the horns to be of one piece with it, and overlay it with copper. Make the pails for removing its ashes, as well as its scrapers, basins, flesh hooks, and fire pans. Make all its utensils of copper. Make for it a grating of meshwork in copper, and on the mesh make 4 copper rings at its corners. Set the mesh below under the ledge of the altar, so that it extends to the middle of the altar. And make poles for the altar, poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with copper. The poles shall be inserted into the rings, so that the poles remain on the 2 sides of the altar when it is carried. Make it hollow of boards, as you were shown on the mountain, so they be made.
Thank you so
Or
much.
so they,
Thank
so
you.
shall they be made,
Yes.
sorry.
Thank you. And see, Justin, would you like to read starting at verse 9?
Thank you, Rabbi. And you shall make the courtyard of the Mishkan on the southern side. There shall be hangings for the courtyard of twisted fine linen, 100 cubits long on one side. And its pillars shall be 20, and their sockets 20 of copper. The hooks of the pillars and their bands shall be of silver. Oops. And so, for the northern end of, in the length hangings, 100 cubits long, its pillars 20, and their sockets 20 of copper, the hooks of the pillars and their bands of silver. The width of the courtyard on the western side, hangings 50 cubits, their pillars 10, their sockets 10. The width of the courtyard on the eastern side, 50 cubits. The hangings on the shoulder shall be 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. And on the second shoulder, there shall be 15 hangings, their pillars 3, their sockets 3. And the gate of the courtyard shall be a screen of 20 cubits made of blue, purple, and crimson wool, and twisted fine linen, the work of an embroiderer, their pillars 4, their sockets 4.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you so much. And Rose, would you like to read a little starting at verse 17?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. All the posts round the enclosure should be banded with silver, and their hooks shall be of silver. Their sockets shall be of copper. The length of the enclosure shall be 100 cubits, and the width 50 throughout, and the height 5 cubits, with hangings of fine twisted linen. The socket shall be of copper. All of the utensils of the tabernacle for all its services, as well as its pegs and all the pegs of the court, shall be of copper.
Thank you so much. That is our entire Torah portion for the week. Thank you all very much for sharing in its reading. If you would like to take out the study sheet, I'd like to share with you just a bit of focus study on it, and then I'll invite everyone to share what you experienced, what you saw, what you read, what you heard during the study of our portion. So this is, of course, a very dramatic moment in the life of the Israelites. They have just left Egypt, where for hundreds of years they were part of an impressed body of labor building the enormous structure we now know as the pyramids of Egypt. And here they are now as free people. They are engaged in a new construction project, and that is to build some kind of structure called here the Mishkan, a place of dwelling for God. So I'd like to focus a little bit on what exactly the nature of this construction project is, and what is it about this Mishkan that would draw God to be a dwelling presence. So if you have the study sheet, we'll look at number 1, which is from our Torah portion. At the very beginning, God said, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst." Now, one of the remarkable things about this particular verse, which commentators emphasize, is that it doesn't say that God is going to dwell in this structure that's being built. It says God is going to dwell in their midst. So there's something about this construction project. There's something about what they are building, or perhaps how they're building it, that is going to cause God to dwell not in the physical structure itself, but in the midst of the people, within, among, or perhaps even inside the people themselves. When we look at ancient structures that were built to worship a god in the ancient world, they were primarily designed to be places that a god would actually dwell within. So the ziggurats that were built in Mesopotamia some 4,000 years ago, they actually had, they were built in such a way as to have rooms that the divinities would actually be presumed to be dwelling in. And so here is kind of a break from that particular paradigm, a break that has God dwelling not inside the structure itself, but inside the people, inside the community, among the people, within the community. So we're going to explore what the nature of that is, and we're going to focus on what seems to be the key part of the construction that is going to cause God to condense as a presence, if you will, and meet with the people there. So here is just a few verses later after the ones we've just read in number 2. Make 2 cherubim, their faces shall be each to the other. I will meet with you there, between the 2 cherubim. So here, this singular aspect of all the materials that we've read so far in this week's Torah portion alone, of all the elements of this Mishkan, it's these 2 beings known as cherubim who will be on the ark itself, and they are going to be both facing one another and simultaneously facing down into the ark where the tablets of the law will reside. So what is it about this, the cherubim and their posture towards one another that is going to be, that's the place where God is going to come and meet with us. So thinking about that this week as I was studying our Torah portion, I started thinking about other places in Torah that we've read and that we will read, where the importance of having a face-to-face encounter, as these 2 cherubim are going to be, seems to be of critical importance. And of course, the first one I thought of was way back in the book of Genesis, in the Garden of Eden story, where God says here, number 3, it is not good for the human to be alone. I will make a helper that is in front of, or in sight of, or opposite. So the notion of this is, the Hebrew there is keneged, to be opposite one another. So the fact that 2 people are opposite one another means that they are confronting one another. They are opposed to one another, meaning that they are facing one another. That seems to be of a critical aspect of the relationship that these 2 beings, who become known as Adam and Eve, are going to have towards one another, that they're facing one another. That's a critical piece of the nature of their relationship. And then shortly after that, we're going to have this story about Cain and Abel, which gives rise to many different interpretations and lessons. But one thing I look back upon it, and I read the Hebrew, and what I was struck by is that when Cain hears that his offering to God has not been as primarily accepted as his brother's was, the Hebrew says Cain was much distressed and his face fell. So this image that I have anyway is that up to this point, Cain is looking at his brother. He's engaged with his brother. And then when he hears something that he assumes to mean that he has now been treated in a secondary fashion, he lowers his face and is no longer looking straight at his brother. And indeed, the response from God directly, when Cain does that, God says, "Why is your face fallen?" As if this is indicative of some kind of problem, that this is a symptom of something that God is trying to make Cain aware of, that he now has a fallen face, a face that is fallen away from looking directly at his brother. And then we have the marvelous story about Jacob and Esau, who have been separated for some 20 years because Jacob was duplicitous. He took something that rightly should have belonged to his older brother, namely the blessing that the older brother receives. And then finally, after 20 years, he's ready to make a reconciliation. And he sees his brother as they ride up towards one another. And Jacob says to Esau, to see your face is like seeing the face of God. This notion about how important a face-to-face relationship is, the possibilities that it opens up, and indeed, not only the divine nature of what is being encountered there, but also how it transforms the other person or each person in terms of their moral, ethical posture towards one another. That's what's picked up by our 20th century Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. And there's a marvelous book written by a student of Levinas, Ira Stone, called Reading Levinas, Reading Talmud. It's a thin volume, but it's just chock full of all kinds of wisdom, in which he looks at how Levinas reads the Talmud and lessons that he takes from it. And in that book, Ira Stone writes, there is in every meeting between two people a third person, a trace of the infinite, a memory of an always absent past. Now, Levinas takes this notion about the face-to-face encounters and says, this becomes this is what brings us into being as ethical people. Why? Because up until that moment, all we've really focused on is ourselves. We've been so absorbed with our own desires, our own hungers, our own, if you will, rapacious, and in the case of Cain's response, our own murderous nature of wanting to obliterate anyone who is not sustaining me. And so Levinas says, when we actually take time to be in front of another person and look at that other person's face, all of a sudden it disrupts that self-focus, and we become now focused on another being. And that opens up an ethical relationship and an ethical imperative, if you will, to take care of the other, to act with a sense of gratitude towards the other for disrupting our self-absorption. And when we have our self-absorption disrupted, then we focus less on our own lack, our own fears, our own anxieties, and we become more attentive to the needs of the other. So here's a quote from Emmanuel Levinas. My ethical relation of love for the other stems from the fact that the self cannot survive by itself alone, cannot find meaning within its own being in the world. So here, Levinas is saying, without being in relationship with another person, we will act as haunted human beings, feeling empty, feeling anxious, feeling deprived. And so when we have this kind of relationship with another, then it makes meaning making possible, because meaning making is only possible when you're in a relationship with another. And this notion that is in Ira Stone's quote from earlier about the trace of the infinite, what Levinas is saying there, as Ira Stone is interpreting, is that when you look at another person and you have this ethical, if you will, disruption of one's own murderous and rapacious nature, that in religious terms, there is a presence of another one who is also present in addition to the human being, and that other person is what Ira Stone refers to as a trace of the infinite, or as Levinas will sometimes directly say, that is God. That is the presence of God coming as being present between two people. And here is Levinas himself. God is the other who turns our nature inside out. And specifically what Levinas means there is that our nature, if left unattended, is to be self-focused, to acquire whatever we need for our own existence, and that our own existence is what is primary. And here what Levinas is indicating is when we have a face-to-face relationship with another, and God becomes present within it as well, and that becomes, if you will, an ethical conversion or reversal of our nature. So he is saying God is the other who turns our nature inside out. Well, here is the way Rabbi Israel Salanter, who was the promoter of an ethical practice within Judaism, puts it. The other's material needs are my spiritual needs. That is, to care for the other person is not just a matter of mutual material benefit. It also is what nurtures my spiritual side. It eases me from the kind of anxieties and fears and worries that I would otherwise be carrying about with me. So here's why I chose this painting at the very top by Yoram Ra'anan. Yoram Ra'anan actually was born in New Jersey and went to University of the Arts in Philadelphia, and then moved to Israel in 1977 and set up on a moshav, on a collective farm in the Judean hills in Israel. And eventually he moved into a medium of art that is just rich, rich, rich colors, all of which seem to have light just coming through all of his colors. He himself, a number of years ago, sustained a great tragedy on the moshav where there was a fire that broke out, and the fire burned down his entire art studio, and I think a couple of thousand works of art were destroyed. And he emerged from that and continues to paint, perhaps with even greater motivation and insight, these iridescent paintings full of life, full of aspiration, full of hope. And his canvases really become sites where both the material and the spiritual merge with one another. So here's what he wrote about his painting, The Cherubim, which is at the top of our study sheet. This work came into being after a lot of searching and scraping through many layers of thick paint. All the cutting away and carving created a sense of motion in the wings and introduced a new kind of light to the work. Wings are coverings that both cover and conceal. But it is in the space between them where the greatest light is revealed. When I look at his painting and I hear his words about scraping away the paint and carving and cutting away and scraping away, I think, maybe that's what's happening in our relationships with another human being that we are faced with, that we're not just there trying to have a transactional relationship with another person, trying to use them for our own benefit. We go through a deep relationship with one another where we expose ourselves, our own vulnerability, and we explore the other person. We get beyond the superficial of the other person. And that, our artist seems to say, is what produces the light that's between the two individuals here on the painting of the two cherubim. And that light that emerges when we've done our self-exposure and our exploration of the other is what our verse tells us will be the presence of God appearing to us. So with that, I'd love to hear what you yourselves experience. Anna, you have something you'd like to share?
Yes, just the last part of what you said, when you were quoting Yoram, saying it's the space between the wings where the greatest light is revealed. If you look at this picture that you've shared with us, the greatest light in that picture is the faces. It's not the space between the faces.
Well, maybe that is that it, where is that iridescing coming from? Whether it's coming from within them, whether it's coming from something outside of them. That's an interesting perspective to
And the
have.
wings remind me of the hummingbirds.
That's
You
very
cannot,
strange.
they have wings, they're moving because they're suspended in the air, but you can't really see them.
Oh, that's
Isn't it?
lovely. And look at all these hands that we have up. So I'm gonna have Jay, Catherine, Rose, and Paul. So Jay, would you please share with us?
Well, on my comedic side, if you'll, I just tested positive 2 days in a row, negative rather, 2 days in a row after almost all month being positive. On the comedic side, thank God that IKEA was not there in the wilderness. There would have been parts missing and people pulling out their hair. They certainly would have never gotten too far to the promised land. Haha. But the other thing that just reminded me when you were talking about the cherubim is the legend around Leonard Cohen's magical line. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And my understanding is it comes from a book by Jack Kornfield on Buddhism. In that book, it's the story of a young man who had lost his leg. He went to a Buddhist monastery to help deal with his extreme anger and his lot in life. Anyway, the interesting part of that came to mind with the cherubim. And also, I used to listen to a motivational tape when I was making the long commute in my early career from Orange County to Century City. I mean, it was amazing that I listened to these cassette tapes. And one of them was, I think it was Napoleon Hill, one of these, very encouraging, grow rich people from the Depression times. And he said, in every contact between two people, there's a third invisible presence,
Nice.
force, and you can't, you must not ignore it. In order to get the work done of two people, you have to include this other, and in order to feel secure. So those are the things that came to mind. And again, in my Chumash here, I'm looking back in the back. I noticed that there's a diagram of the tabernacle, but there's also a timeline. And just to see the timing from where these things come from, these phrases and these insights, is every week I am just amazed. And then the last thing is that the vastness of all of this, if anyone has noticed that the Webb telescope has now gone even farther back in our universe.
Yeah.
And it keeps going farther and farther back. So to me, it just further brings out the power of not only Hashem, but everything that works to make all of us be and work, and makes me wonder why we all think that we're so individually significant. It just, how can you?
Jace, thank you so much, and we're so grateful and pleased that you're now on the road to recovery and testing negative. Thank you so much. Let me call on Catherine.
Yeah, I was thinking about this line, God is the other who turns our nature inside out. And looking at the painting and thinking about the fact that in the Mishkan, the colors are blue, purple, and crimson. And here we have this vibrant green and yellow in the midst of the cherubim. And so what we get out of that is a rainbow.
That's very nice, Catherine.
Like, okay, so that just really struck me when I saw that.
Thank you, Catherine. It's beautiful to have pointed that out to us. I hadn't thought of it that way. Thank you. And let me call upon Rose, and then Paul, then Richard, then Robert, and Justin.
Well, there are a couple of things.
Yeah.
I was going to kind of talk about the Mishkan as a team building experience, which is, I think, kind of what it was. But he gives Hashem gives very specific instruction, because, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Can you imagine the chaos if they had tried to just, put together their own ideas? But what you're talking about, the face-to-face kind of Barton Beaver thing is very interesting. And it's interesting that the word for face is panayim. It's in the plural. We never talk about a single countenance.
Mm.
It's
Oh, I like that.
actually a series, it's almost like cubism, like a Picasso cubist face, where you have a bunch of different angles that appear in different relationships.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. I really appreciate you bringing in the cubists and their notion that every face has multiple planes and perspectives that one can engage that face with. That's nice.
Right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much, Robert. Let me call upon Paul and then Richard, Robert, and Justin. Paul. Yeah, you'll have to unmute, Paul.
You were saying about the business of scraping away, painting parts of the paint, and then you see what the next level is. When I first, back in December, when you had that picture where you had Blue Boy on one side, and then you had this very complex picture where the gentleman who was painting it was doing all kinds of stuff just to duplicate. It's a hat, and so it got to be really complicated. And so I thought myself, let's see how I could scrape this thing away. And I decided to run that picture in black and white instead of color. And then all of a sudden, that picture, which was so jumbled, has a center point of attention, which turned out to be the watch. Okay. And, so now I did the same thing with this picture, and I ran the picture in the black and white. And suddenly the wings come out so beautifully and the wings are almost hidden with all the schmaltz that they put on top of it, with all the colors. You kind of miss how beautiful the wings are. So if you have a chance, just run your printer once more, black and white, and you'll see the wings.
Thank you, Paul. That's so rich. Thank you. Really love that. And Richard?
Thank you, Rabbi. Two things about this teamwork that Rose mentioned. I know at the fall ingathering that we're thankful not so much or not only for the food, but for the opportunity Hashem has given us to learn to work together. And that the business of building the Mishkan according to the design, which we all saw on the mountain, whatever that meant, scratched in sand, I don't know how anybody remembers this, but the impression I got was that by the whole group attending to this, they're ingesting and integrating the essence of God. So that's what it means, as you say, it's in each one of, and that's how he puts us there by giving this task of developing a house where he's worshipped. But it's when we go into it, how happy is the man who lives in the house of God? And that happiness comes into us because we have worked as a unit toward this one reality. And the other thing I wanted to say was about this, you had said about the ethical relation of love for another stems from the fact that the self can't not survive by self alone. And I puzzled there on what can be meant by the self.
Okay.
It's such a word we bandy around, but we have an ego, we have an unconscious, we have a soul, we have all these things going on. And we've held through all these weeks, there's always the notion of, well, what are you denying and projecting to somebody else rather than face to face? And I wonder if it isn't the case that for some people at some point in some of their life, it's about having the relationship, letting everybody that's inside speak and be heard to whatever the self is, to see them face to face as part of the whole, before you can step out in the world and not be bedeviled by the hidden forces in you jumping out and attacking, or jumping out and eating too much or whatever.
Wow, okay. So what you got me thinking about is this line here about that I may dwell in their midst. So there is this Kabbalistic notion that what that means is, well, that there has to be a midstness dimension in
Yes.
order for God to dwell. If there's to be a midstness dimension, that means there need to be some degree of space between us. And so it's within that space between us that God will dwell. And maybe, as you're indicating, it's not just a space that is between two human beings, but also there needs to be some degree of space within oneself, the possibility that there are multiple aspects of who we are, and that we need to kind of be in touch with that possibility as well. In other words, that it is an if you will, anti-totalitarian approach to what it means to bring God into the world, that we need to not essentialize ourselves, and we need to not essentialize the other person. We need to expand the possibilities within both who we are and who the other person is as well. And that brings the divine more clearly to dwell within us and among us. So thank you for all that richness. Thank you. Let me call upon Robert, and then we'll call, and then Justin. So Robert, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you again for another lovely evening. I want to thank Jay for mentioning Leonard Cohen. You know, he wrote this line, and I have to tell you, as a poet, the simplicity of it and the elegance of it is exquisite. Dance me to the end of love. He just took out the width and did it, but I have to tell you, every time I hear that and see that, I think, my goodness, what an exquisite line. Anyhow, this is what I really want to say. In what we read tonight, we saw two angels. And here's what came to my mind. What came to my mind is covenant. Covenant, the middle between recognition and observance. Moses is saying over and over and over again, as I understand it, recognize me, I am your Lord. Obey me, I am your Lord. When we do these two things, we have obedience to the covenant. And so another thing that came to mind, if you look at faith and reason, truth is in the middle, right? You can't have, if there's an antagonism between faith and reason, it can't be truth. If you have, for example, science and religion, which is along the same line, looking at each other, if they are in harmony, you have truth, which is light in the middle. And then another one is justice and mercy. Again, the same concept. You know, you need both of them. And when they're exercised properly, we have that light of truth in the middle. And then I have, you know, thought and mind and understanding and heart. They're very different as I understand them. And what you have is a higher level of what we can be in the middle. And then the last one is the life within and the life without. They should correspond. And when what we say and what we do, when they are like these two angels looking at each other, right? Then what we have is the light in the middle. We don't have hypocrisy, but we have spirituality, whatever degree it might be. So those are my thoughts, and I love the imagery. I love the imagery, and I love Paul's contribution. He always brings joy. That's it. Thank you.
Robert, thank you so much. What you have brought us back to is actually one of the first verses that I mentioned in Torah that relates to this week's Torah portion. This notion about it's not good for human to be alone. I will make a helper that is opposite him. And so that notion about sometimes when we think about someone being opposite us, what it conjures up is some kind of conflict, and even perhaps irreconcilable. Or when we think about the notion of opposition or an opponent, we think of someone that we need to defeat. And here, the notion of opposite rather is something that is setting up a difference that is creates a tension, a positive tension, a dynamic tension that between these two poles, if you will, generates all this energy and all this light and all this life and all this possibility. And so you in your remarks share with us a variety of dynamic tensions that are necessary in order for life to grow and exist. So thank you so much for reminding us about that. And Justin, please share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Kabal Satira, that Kabal Satira, to receive the Torah, this is some way that the covenant is being received into the people, and the infinite, again, is being held in this finite, but Shavuos is also the reception of the Torah. So there are opposites that are going on, but there is a real sense of how does one of these opposites make itself receptive to the divine. This is the second part to this. This whole piece around the third. I want to preface this comment, which is a quote from Carl Jung on the transcendent function, which you may have even thought of in terms of preparing this. That I was speaking with a younger person and we were at odds, and that younger person said to me, "Oh, you must think you're God." And I wanted to respond, and I felt this sort of calling out of me and hearing this presentation today. It's like, that's what I wanted to say, though, was there's God between us. That third. Now, I don't know if it would have gone on right if I had actually said that. You must think you're. I had to just take in what was going on with that. So, with respect, this is a short paragraph from The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, paragraph 189. The shuttling to and fro of arguments and affects represents the transcendent function of opposites. The confrontation of the two positions generates a tension charged with energy and creates a living third thing, not a logical stillbirth in accordance with the principle tertium non datur, but a movement out of the suspension between the opposites, a living birth that leads to a new level of being, a new situation. The transcendent function manifests itself as a quality of conjoined opposites. So long as these are kept apart naturally for the purpose of avoiding conflict, they do not function and remain inert.
Wow.
So bringing the two, and Kabal Satira, bringing that back around, it's the conjoining of these opposites that they're actually brought into some kind of conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. That's very, very rich. And what came to mind as you were sharing that is, I go back to this quote from Ira Stone, in which he's giving us his reading of Emmanuel Levinas about when there is in every meeting face-to-face between two people, a third, a trace of the infinite, a memory of an always absent past. So this notion about a trace of the infinite being that spark, that light that is between us, is meant to evoke the notion that if we understand that it's a trace of the infinite, it means it's a presence that cannot ever be fully known or contained or controlled. And the lesson there is to recognize that that's what also exists within the human being that's opposite us. Someone who can never be fully known, that there's always going to be an element of mystery in the other person. And then perhaps that's even what is seducing us to want to get to know the other person. And that we understand that we can never fully know the other person, perhaps we'll appreciate we can never fully control the other person, and that we can never fully contain the other person, that the other person contains the infinite possibilities that this trace element represents. So Anna, you have something you wish to share with this? Yes.
Yeah, I want to just say that I don't think I've ever been so grateful to an artist as Yoram Ra'anan looking at this painting. Every time, I mean, in my mind, there is a picture that you see, thousands of artworks of the ark and the two angels facing each other. They're just like static. The wings match. It's all, it's just still. And in this painting, he has made both of those faces different. The angle is different. They're perceiving each other from a lighter side and a darker side, and we're watching them from a slightly off-centered angle. And the beats of the wings, just look at that. The span of those of the flight feathers, if you would say, are different, one wing to the other. What's happening there is action. There really is an exchange between the two, and they're both in the process of responding to each other. It's not static, it's moving. And I've never perceived it that way or thought of it that way. And I think this is so brilliant that he's able to do that.
So beautiful. So as a way to help me, to remind me, to bring us back to another point about what this whole Torah portion has been describing, which is the Mishkan. And so what is unique about the Mishkan, as opposed to the other kinds of monuments to a divinity that we are aware of that were constructed in ancient times, in antiquity, is that this was not a construct that had a verticality to it. Unlike the ziggurat, unlike the Tower of Babel, unlike the pyramids, this was a horizontal structure. There are layers that were designed for a horizontal approach. The steps that one needed to get to the altar, the steps that one needed to get to the Holy of Holies. And once you got to the Holy of Holies, there was a curtain that you need to go by. So it was all a bit of horizontal motion as opposed to vertical motion. This is telling us some kind of a message about how one encounters the divine, which is not to physically elevate oneself above others, but to encounter one another on the same plane. And the structure itself, the Mishkan itself, was not designed unlike the ziggurat and unlike the pyramids. The Mishkan was not designed to be stabilized in one place. As we read today, it was designed with rings and poles. It was meant to move with the people. There's some notion here about how that's why the word for law in Hebrew is halacha, which comes from the Hebrew verb holech, which means to move. So there's a sense of movement and development rather than a kind of static set. So Anna, what you're pointing out is this, as so many, Robert and so many have pointed out, this kind of dynamic quality rather than the static quality. And so when we look at another person, we shouldn't see the difference that they represent as being a source of threat that we need to obliterate.
It's also ephemeral, what he did in this. This is an ephemeral. It's like a tiny snapshot of something that's acting.
It's everything is in motion. Everything is in motion. And if we can appreciate that, and rise to an ethical response to it, rather than rise to a sense of fear and consequently a murderous response to it, then we have truly helped bring God into this world. And I want to thank each and every one of you who contributes to that sense of dynamism and being in motion. And I want to I see though that Sherry, you had your hand up and you wanted to say something.
Well, I was just, reflecting on how we look at other people and about, being a space in between and being able to have the reflection of God on that other person. And we live in such a divisive world, and our country is so divisive that I was, meditating on that thought about if we were able to look at other people across the political aisle and see them as human beings instead of some kind of a horrible adversary, that we would all be functioning better as a country.
Thank you so much for bringing it to that level as well, that we should view the space between us as a place where things grow and where the divine becomes present, rather than being a definition of a battlefield between us. So thank you all very much for helping to make
Thank
that
you,
kind of,
Rabbi.
thank you so very much for helping to
Thank
make
you,
that
Rabbi.
kind of a world.
Thank you, Rabbi.
God bless
Thank
you all.
See you next week.
Wonderful.
Be
Have a
well.
good week,
Marco.
everybody.
Be well. Thank you.
Fine.